Hello, everybody, and welcome to SBI's Reigniting Small Business Podcast. I am Patrick Lee of SBI.
And I'm Laura Richards. And today we're going to introduce to you the Bump. The Bump is an incredible tool from Spark Business Institute, and it layers the mindset of the owner with their business. And here to tell you a little bit more and explain about what that looks like is Patrick Lee.
So the Bump is not an old disco dance. I mean, it is an old disco dance, but that's not how we're using this. The Bump is actually a diagnostic that is pretty significant because when you're looking at a business, there's different ways to approach that. And so a business owner goes out and says, hey, I need some help analyze my business. And there's usually three approaches to analyzing that. One is folks come in, they take a look at the mechanics of the business, right? They say, okay, here's the business, here's its finances, here's its infrastructure, here's its personnel, here's its market. How's it doing? How is it set up to do well as that business in that business model? Another way of looking at things is that folks come in and they assess the leadership team. They assess the owner. They assess anybody who's in charge of making that business go. And they say, okay, what's your skill sets look like? How well are you primed to do this? What learning do you have to do? There's a whole coaching mentality. We will coach these leaders to be optimal, because by being optimal, they will then impact the business well. And then there's a third approach, which is more of a skill set approach, right? It's a knowledge approach. We come in, we look at, we're a consultant who does marketing. We come in, we look at the marketing. We come in for outsourced CFO, we look at your numbers. So we're assessing your business from a very narrow sort of window of what we know. It's almost like going to a specialist. You don't feel well, you go to a liver specialist. Well, they're not looking at the rest of you, they're looking there. So those are usually the three approaches. And the thing that we discovered is that you can't do it that way and expect the best results. The best results are when you do have that forensic look at the business and the understanding of the business, but you also have an understanding of the mindset and the abilities of the leadership team, and they overlay. And you see, does it line up? Does it make sense? Does it work? And at the same time, you're assessing the inhibitors affecting that business so that you know which of those very specific skill sets is needed to help this business move.
So we should probably tell people the BUMP stands for Business Mindset Plateau Evaluator. And with that, why is what we're doing so special?
It's special because for small businesses, the general attitude towards a small business is the professional help that's coming in is coming in on their terms. They're coming in either because they want to coach that team, or they want to strategize about that business, or they're a very specific industry-specific consultant. They want to come in and they want to do a marketing plan and a marketing rollout, or whatever that looks like. That presupposes that accidentally they got it right? The thing holding that business back was the planning for that business, the infrastructure, all those things weren't lined up right. And so we come in, we analyze it, we figure out what's wrong there, and that's all that needed to happen. Or that their issue was poor sales skills. They don't have a good sales team, they have a good sales approach. The sales consultant shows up, helps them do it right, it goes well. Or the leadership team just needed a little bit of coaching, a little bit of fine tuning to get to the next level. But frequently, those approaches are brought in from the outside as a one size fits all. I hired you, you come in as the consultant, and you take your approach. The nice thing about the Bump is it tells which of these areas actually needs the focus, right? Which area requires a lot of coaching, which requires specialization, which requires a reconfiguration of the business model. Sometimes it needs a little of all, but the Bump is able to sort of predictively tell you what's the main component here that needs to be addressed for everything else to go forward. And it gives the business owner the opportunity to have a objective, independent diagnostic that says, hey, here's where you probably should focus. At that point, that owner can go out and hire the appropriate skill set, whether they need coaching or they need a business model design or they need a marketing specialist, right? It helps them know that. And that's important because what the owner thinks is wrong with the business or is stopping the business from going frequently is not what's actually going on. The fact that they've thought that for a long time and been fighting that fight, and they're just like, I know if I could just get my sales team right, everything would go, right? Well, that's usually not the case. They're usually looking at the parts of the business that they understand and that they want to impact. They're not necessarily looking at all the other pieces. So frequently, the things that are actually holding the business back can be themselves, right? Like their mindset is the issue, and they're not necessarily ever going to admit that. The second is that they are looking at a particular area of the business that they're sure is the area, and everything they're ignoring, by just the fact that it's being ignored, is affecting the business more. So having an independent ability to sort of look at it and understand it before you select your help is a key.
Yeah, we were talking examples about this, you and I, earlier, and I think one of the best ways to give our listeners and viewers an idea of what the information actually looks like and how it's useful might be to give them an example.
So we're going to use you as the example. So when you owned your restaurants and you were in your business, it was interesting because you had certain skills and certain parts of the business that motivated you and that you understood. Your outreach to your clientele, your customer service, the way that all that worked was something that you were highly focused on. And you were assuming during that by doing that at the optimal, that all these other things over here would go where you want them to go. But you were getting very frustrated because the more you optimize those things you wanted to optimize, it wasn't impacting necessarily the areas you wanted to jump into. So speak to that a little bit.
So one of the things that I quickly realized from being on a business advisory board is that getting outside your restaurant and listening to your peer group and getting some focus that's beyond just you is so important, because it makes you realize what other people are doing in their businesses that you're not. For me, I was a marketing professional by trade prior to getting into the restaurant industry. And so I tried to fix every problem with marketing. And I'm also a high I on the DISC profile. So I tend to be super social and really get a lot of value out of engagement with people. So that's exactly where I gravitated in my business. I wanted to be the contact point for every client, every catering order, etc. I wanted to be that face in the front of the house. And then if we were ever having, an issue growing the business or even with profitability, I always went to my marketing arsenal first. So working through you, Patrick, and the assessment and so forth, and really highlighting my blind spots opened up a whole on-ramp for getting momentum going in the business and ultimately setting myself up for sale.
And the way you describe that is exactly perfect, because when you showed up as a client, you showed up coming to me and telling me what your issues already were. You already knew what they were, and you were very much just looking for somebody to say, oh yeah, that is what it is. Just do this. And what was interesting was when you came, you brought with you that same distractedness that left later. You were always on your phone. You were always checking who's texting and making sure the order went out on time and checking with you were totally focused on that. And it was later when you got called to task a little bit on it that you you put the phone away and you started paying attention to what people were saying, and the metamorphosis of how you then started running your business, not immediately, but down the road a little bit from that, was striking. It was you were completely trying to stay out of the restaurant actually and manage from over here and empower over here, and you were doing things in a strikingly different manner by choice. It wasn't like I came in and said, hey, do this. It was more, hey, be exposed to this. Look what you're missing. Look at what could be. Talk to these people. And you chose how to do that. There's plenty of clients I've gone into and I've pointed out, here's the issue, right? And I can even back it up with something like the bump or another set of assessments or evaluations and back it up. And they still need to believe that their analysis is the analysis. So, it's great having you actually talk to this because for the longest time, you were my actual favorite case study, which may be why we're working together now, because when you pivoted, it was dramatic. I mean, it was a dramatic pivot, and it was definitely a mindset pivot. And I think initially your thoughts were more about the mechanics of the business, not the mindset that you were bringing to it.
That's exactly right. So 2 things were really important in that process. One was accountability, because, when it's reflected back to you, you have to see it. And the second was, they always say, see the forest and not the trees. But until you see something, you don't see it sometimes. But once you see it, you can't not see it. So making sure we're looking at the right picture. And that's one of the things that the bump does really well, is it illustrates the full picture. And by that, I'm talking about battery and transparency. And those are 2 things I would like you to go a little bit into.
So it's really interesting. And I can tell a lot of stories about this, but we do the mindset assessment, where what we're looking at is very predictive of the leadership's ability to accomplish certain things. So to give you a quick example, everybody out there has taken assessment before. They've taken a DISC or a Myers-Briggs, or there's a myriad of these, and they're temperament assessments, and they're very useful. And there are a bunch of others that folks take, and assessments can be extremely useful. One of the things, though, that assessments typically don't do is they typically don't give the assessor a true, honest predictor of anything, because all of us business folks, we're like onions. We have a whole bunch of different ways that we present ourselves, right? We present ourselves to our employees in one way. We present ourselves to our clients in another. We present ourselves to our networking in another way, to our peers, to our family. There's always these masks and ways in which we need to project, because we feel we must project strength. We must project that we know what's going on. We can't show weakness. We gotta whatever. And as we're putting all these masks on, some of them become ingrained. We believe those masks ourselves. And so a lot of times we're telling stories that we start to behave from. The nice thing about the bump is that when we do the mindset evaluation, it tells me very predictively and clearly your transparency, meaning how honest are you being with yourself, with me, with everything, so that you are capable of both acknowledging and owning where there is a weakness or a problem or a fear or something that you would never raise your hand and tell anybody was there. And so that transparency means I can assess if the bump is telling me accurate information, or if it's information that's highly influenced by your need to project a certain image or your belief of how the business lies. So it strips things very clear. There's a clarity and a transparency that happen from this. In addition to that, it also takes a look at the business owner's battery. We all have a certain level of energy and motivational energy and ability to go get things done. You wake up in the morning, get out of bed, and there is a certain amount you're going to accomplish between when you get up and when you're done. When your battery is done and time to go to bed, you'll start the next day. And people's batteries vary. It's not the same, and it's not as easy as drinking a Monster, right? And now I got energy. The batteries are built into our physiology, like how we're able to function. And by looking at and assessing very accurately each person's battery level, it lets us know what's really capable. I had one client who was so ambitious. She was intellectually extremely ambitious about where she wanted to go, how she wanted to affect her industry, where she wanted to take her business, and it excited her. Well, we ended up, when we did this analysis, we ended up looking and seeing that her battery was fairly average. It wasn't super strong. It wasn't irrelevant or weak, but it wasn't one with all that ambition that she was going to be able to do it based on sheer drive and energy. It was going to be difficult. And so the whole thing had to be designed around systems and making sure that when her battery ran out, there was a setup to allow things to continue, because she wasn't going to be able to hook her cables in and drive it, right? And it was interesting to see what she chose to do, because she ended up backing way off of her original where she was going to go and sort of brought it in to be more manageable. And that was a predictive thing. We knew that was going to happen based on the bump. So the bump helps make sure that you don't have to step out into places that seem like the right way to go, but then you find yourself stuck once you get in there and you're like, how did I get here? It's predictive.
So you can't fake it till you make it with the bump.
Well, you can't fake it till you make it with us, and you shouldn't fake it till you make it with yourself. Now, I'm not telling you that fake it till you make it to your market isn't a reasonable approach, but we're not taking the bump and saying, hey, everybody, here's what this business is about. We're doing this for your own good. This is for you to understand, look, here's where I'm going to get hung up. Here's where the challenges are going to come. If I'm prepared for that now, I'm more likely to get over that. And if I don't even want to approach it, I probably need to readdress where I'm going and how I'm getting there.
So there have been times, Patrick, where we've had a client that's taken a bump and we get certain information back regarding, what we think, whether it's a good decision to move in a certain direction or not. At the end of the day, when you debrief the client and you tell them what information you've garnered around it, is it then their call? And how do you deal with it when the call they want to make isn't supported by what you find in the bump?
So the best way to put this is this. It's always the business owner's decision where they're going to go. It's not necessarily their decision if we're going to take them on as a client. So I'm loath to do a bump, see that the stated direction that these folks want to go in predictively is going to be an absolute, that march of death march, right? Whatever that, like, we're going to this is going to be so painful and likely not get there. I'm going to let that person know here, hey, this is why this looks this way. This is what you got to worry about. I'm not recommending this. They go, well, I'm all in. I have to make a call. I don't want to take on a project just to make money. I don't want to take on a project that is probably a losing proposition. And I don't want to take on a project where when I'm talking to the person and pointing out, here's the challenges, and they just sort of want to brush over them. That's the worst case scenario. I could be convinced to do one of those if that owner goes, you know what, that sounds exactly right. I understand where it's coming from and all, but I want to get past that. I really want to get to this vision. I'm ready to tackle this, and I understand that it's going to be difficult. You've made that clear. But how do we do it anyway? That one I may go, absolutely. But the person who is, no, that's not going to be a problem. We just need to go. They're probably going to end up doing it on their own or finding another professional assistant to help them do it, because I don't want to touch that. These are predictive. I know how painful that trip is going to be.
So have you used one of these in a predictive fashion and later had the business owner come back and thank you and say, that's the best thing I never did?
Yes, that is absolutely the case. And it's funny you put it that way, because so I have one where the gentleman wanted to reinvent his practice, attorney practice, and he was very frustrated with the type of clients he was getting and how that interaction went and where they would go, because they wouldn't take his advice. They just keep coming to him and bringing him things they wanted done that he was against his advice or not the way he wanted to practice. But that was all that was coming in. And so he kept taking it and taking it. And we pointed out that he had a very fixed methodology that he wanted to use, and he wasn't broadcasting that methodology out to folks, right? He wasn't opening that up. He wasn't saying that. And we said, and based on the bump, predictively, you're not somebody who's going to be confident in turning away business or saying no or being very direct, right? So that you get the right people in. You're much more likely to lay back and try to service the people who are coming in, sort of be everything to everybody. And that wasn't something that went over well. And he couldn't understand, even argue with me, like, well, why would you turn any business away? And if people are coming in looking for something, shouldn't you give it to them? And I said, yeah, but it's not getting you want to be, and you're miserable doing the kind of work they want. And obviously you're attracting not what you want. He's like, yeah, but it's business. What if nobody else came in? And we've all had that thought, and so long story short, we did not go any further with that. I left and went about my business. Probably a year and a half later, a big announcement comes out from his office that I get, and he has completely pivoted, and he is doing exactly what that original plan was, that I had pointed out to him. He's even using the same language. He's moved into a building, new signage, new everything, geared specifically to that new clientele that is where he should have been all along. Now, I didn't get him there, but that he ended up there. Like, once you've seen it, like you said, it's hard to unsee. And I guess after enough times of running up against it, he's like, okay, this is really what I need to do.
It's that knowledge and understanding. Sometimes it takes a while to marinate in it.
Oh, absolutely. And anybody who comes to this thinking they have all the answers still, this is silly, why do it? I already know what I need. They're not there yet. They either do know what they need and they need to go do it, or they don't, but they need to go experience that they don't, so that they're open to what this reveals.
Exactly. All right. Well, I think we're about out of time for today. Is there any word of wisdom you want to leave our listeners with?
I think that diagnostics in general are underutilized in the small business place. I think that it's a lot of gut, instinctual, intuitive problem solving. And I think that there's a desire to just do things and then react later. That works up to a certain point, but you can get yourself stuck in some pretty deep investments, some pretty bad burnout, some frustrations, and some lack of success if you don't actually do the evaluating and the analysis that needs to be done. I think the bump is a very comprehensive general practitioner analysis that's going to tell you all the things you need to know about your leadership team, about your inhibitors, and about that business. And it may not be the final analysis and diagnoses, but it's going to give you a pretty clear picture of, okay, what do I need to address? What needs to happen next? Where do I go from here?
Thanks, Patrick. That was a great way to sum it up. And I wanted to mention that next week we'll be doing a second part of this series to go into the inhibitors in some depth and provide a little bit more information to those of you who are interested in learning more about the bump and how Spark Business Institute can help you. So thanks for tuning in today, and we'll be back on Tuesday at 1 o'clock.
Bye, everybody.